never listened! Not once!
Sunlight spilled like liquid gold through the bay windows of my parents' dining room, scattering across crystal glasses and turning them into tiny prisms. The air was heavy with tradition, the kind you don't need to explain because it clings to the walls, to the mahogany table polished so carefully it could almost reflect your face. For most people, this would be the picture of comfort, a family gathered for Sunday dinner, the comforting smell of pot roast, the familiar rustle of linen napkins. But for me, Gabrielle Morgan, 38 years old, and supposedly in full control of my life, it was always more complicated. This dining room was less about warmth and more about performance. Dad stood at the head of the table, carving roast with surgical precision, each slice falling onto Wedgwood china as if the act itself were a business transaction. Mom hovered nearby, orchestrating the rhythm of dishes passed, wine poured, conversation steered. I adjusted the burgundy napkin on my lap and tried to breathe through the rich aroma of rosemary and beef. "Just a small piece for me, Dad," I murmured, already knowing what his answer would be. And sure enough, without even glancing up, he piled my plate with more than I wanted. "You're too thin, Gabrielle. Always have been." The words slid out of his mouth like a reflex, one of those little reminders that no matter how old you get, your parents can shrink you back into childhood in a heartbeat. I opened my mouth to remind him that I was capable of managing my own portions, that I was an architect trusted with multi-million-dollar projects, when the front door banged open. The sound shattered the tableau like glass. Vanessa had arrived. She swept in with her usual flair, her husband Mark trudging behind her, their 3 children spilling into the dining room like a tidal wave of backpacks, sneakers, and squabbling voices. "Sorry we're late," she announced, though there wasn't a shred of apology in her tone. Traffic was awful near the outlet mall. The outlet mall? I asked before I could stop myself. My words drowned under Mom's shriek of joy at seeing her grandchildren. Chairs scraped, plates clattered, the calm moment dissolved. And then I saw it, Dad catching Vanessa's eye, sharing that subtle nod, the same conspiratorial glance that had shadowed my childhood. It was the look I always dreaded, the silent communication that said a plan was in motion, one that somehow never included me until it was too late. My chest tightened with old instincts, anticipation, dread, the certainty of being ambushed. Dinner resumed with forced normalcy, the passing of mashed potatoes, Dad quizzing Mark about the stock market, Mom asking about my architectural projects as if she were hosting a panel discussion. The children whined about vegetables, their voices filling every corner of the room. And then Vanessa cleared her throat. She didn't just speak. She performed. "We're moving into your Lakehouse next week," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes glittering with a rehearsed excitement. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The words landed like a thunderclap in my mind. My lake house. My sanctuary. The property I had poured 6 years of my life and $515,000 into. "It's just sitting empty anyway, Gabrielle," Dad added smoothly, watching me closely now. The children chimed in, fighting over which bedrooms would be theirs. Their arguments blurred into background noise as realization hit me. The kids had already chosen their rooms. This wasn't spur of the moment. This had been planned, discussed, and decided without me. Mom leaned in with that falsely soothing tone she reserved for wrapping demands in silk. Your lake house has plenty of room, and they won't be there forever. What she didn't say was obvious. I was expected to bend, to surrender, because that's what I'd always done. That was the family script. Vanessa demanded, the parents supported, and I yielded. But as I sat there, listening to them claim the space I had fought to build after my divorce, after nights of flood damage repairs, alone while they vacationed in the Caribbean, something shifted. The house wasn't just property. It was survival. It was the place where I learned to breathe again, to exist without fear, to rebuild myself from the studs up. And in that dining room, with pot roast cooling on the plates and voices clamoring over me, I felt the beginnings of something I hadn't dared before. A refusal. Because this story wasn't really about a house. It was about boundaries, about how far a family will go when entitlement is dressed as need. And it was about how far I was finally willing to go to protect what was mine. I didn't know it yet, but the moment Vanessa claimed my lake house as her own was the moment everything in our family would unravel. And by the end of it, none of us would leave this story the same. The room tilted for a moment as Vanessa's words echoed inside my head. We're moving into your lake house next week. I blinked, my fork still frozen mid-air, as if time itself had stalled around me. The only sound that seemed to cut through the ringing in my ears was the shrill laughter of her children bickering about who got which bedroom. I get the blue one, shouted her oldest, bouncing in his seat. No, Mom promised me, his sister countered, her voice rising like nails on glass. And that was when I knew this wasn't sudden. This wasn't desperation. This was orchestrated. They had walked into this house already confident, already assigned roles in their little play. I glanced around the table. Dad carefully avoided my eyes, carving more roast with the calm of a man pretending nothing was wrong. Mom adjusted her water glass, her face deliberately neutral. Mark, my brother-in-law, stared at his plate as though it might rescue him, his silence louder than any word. Vanessa, though, she leaned back with the smug smile of a woman already victorious. Your house is perfect for us, she said, as though I were simply a landlord waiting to be informed. Plenty of space, and it's just temporary. 7 months, maybe less, until the foundation repairs are done. I felt a spark of anger, sharp and unfamiliar. Excuse me? I said slowly. Dad waved a hand, brushing aside my protest like a gnat. It's sitting empty anyway, Gabrielle. You spend all your time in the city. Family needs to help family. His tone wasn't cruel, worse, it was casual. As if my ownership, my sacrifices, were nothing more than inconvenient details. But I couldn't let them rewrite the story. 6 years ago, that lakeside property had been my lifeline. I remembered standing in the ruins after the flood, my boots soaked through, my hands raw from pulling out waterlogged boards, while my family sent photos from their Caribbean cruise. I remembered writing the checks, $420,000 for the purchase, $95,000 in repairs, money scraped together through late nights and endless contracts. I remembered the nights after my divorce, curling up in that half-finished house, teaching myself to sleep without checking the locks 3 times. That house wasn't empty. It was alive with sweat, with healing, with every dollar and every heartbeat I had poured into it. Yet here they sat, treating it as if it were a spare bedroom in their home. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice adopting that false earnestness she'd perfected since childhood. "We'd do the same for you, Gabrielle. You know we would. That's what families do." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Memories flashed like slides. The time she borrowed my car for a weekend that stretched to 2 months, returning it with a cracked windshield she swore had always been like that. The $3,000 loan that ballooned into $18,000 with excuses and interest-free delays, never repaid. The spare key she'd secretly made to my apartment, discovered only when I found her showering in my bathroom unannounced. Her words, "We'd do the same for you," were not just lies. They were gaslighting, meant to make me question my own reality. Mom jumped in, her voice soft, maternal, manipulative. "You're always so particular about your things, Gabrielle. Don't be unreasonable. This is just for a few months." And then Dad, sliding into his condescending tone, the one he reserved for clients who didn't understand the numbers in a contract. "This is what families do. We help each other." My chest tightened. This was the script I had grown up with. Vanessa took, they excused, and I carried the cost. The cycle had repeated so many times it felt almost preordained. But something in me cracked differently this time. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was the scars of rebuilding that house alone. Or maybe it was the simple realization that if I surrendered now, I would be surrendering not just a house, but the last piece of myself I had fought to protect. I looked at Vanessa's smile, wide and confident, already savoring her victory. I thought about how often women, daughters, sisters like me, had been expected to yield in silence, sacrificing their labor, their dreams, their peace, because family needs them to. And in that moment, I felt something shift. A clarity, sharp and steady. I set my napkin down on the table. Slowly, deliberately. The gesture was small, but it was enough. The clinking of silverware stopped. Conversations froze. Even the children sensed the weight of silence pressing down on the room. They thought they had written me into their story. They didn't realize I was about to pick up the pen. Because this wasn't just an ambush. This was the breaking point. And they were about to find out exactly who they were dealing with. The silence after I set down my napkin felt like a storm waiting to break. For a moment, nobody moved, forks suspended, glasses half raised, eyes flicking nervously from me to the manila folder I was sliding out of my handbag. Vanessa's confident smile faltered. Dad's hand paused mid-slice, the knife hovering over the roast as though it had turned into something sharp and dangerous. Even the children went quiet, sensing something had shifted in the script of the evening. I laid the folder flat on the polished mahogany table and flipped it open. The sound of the paper snapping against the wood was louder than any argument I could have made. "The contractors start on Monday," I said evenly. Inside, page after page of renovation contracts, city permits, stamped and signed, lay in perfect order. 3 months ago, I had begun the process. I had already committed to a full 9-month renovation. Vanessa blinked rapidly, her cheeks paling as she scanned the documents. The realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't a whim, and it wasn't negotiable. This was already set in motion. The table collapsed into stunned silence. Mom's water glass froze halfway to her lips. Dad's jaw tightened, the way it always did when negotiations slipped out of his control. Vanessa's children looked bewildered, torn between the seriousness in the room and the mashed potatoes cooling on their plates. I took a sip of water, my hand steady, the crystal glass catching the light and scattering rainbows across the tablecloth. It felt symbolic, sharp, dazzling, untouchable. "You can't be serious," Vanessa whispered, her voice rising half an octave. "We've already given notice on our apartment. Where are we supposed to go?" I let her words hang, deliberately resisting the urge to fill the silence. I thought of every instance she had leaned on me without consequence. The loans, the lies, the car, the key. This was not about housing. This was about entitlement. "You'll have to find somewhere else," I said finally, my tone firmer than I'd expected. Dad slammed his knife down, abandoning all pretense of calm. "Gabrielle, be reasonable. Your sister has 3 children. This is bigger than you." His voice shifted into his corporate negotiator tone, the one he used to bulldoze clients into deals they didn't want. "Foundation issues," Mom added quickly, as though her words would soften the blow. "You can't expect them to live in unsafe conditions." I met her gaze. "I don't. I expect them to find another solution that doesn't involve taking mine." That was when Dad leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "This situation could affect decisions about the future," he warned. The words dripped with subtext. Inheritance. Right on schedule. The same tired weapon, pulled out whenever reason failed. The promise of wealth withheld. The manipulation of legacy. But this time, something inside me was different. Instead of fear, I felt clarity. "Poor planning on your part," I said slowly, locking eyes with him, "does not constitute an emergency on mine." The effect was immediate. Recognition flickered across his face, his own words, his sacred business mantra, being thrown back at him. Words he had repeated to countless clients who failed to prepare, now turned against him by the daughter he had underestimated. Mom gasped softly. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a fish, her usual arsenal of demands momentarily empty. I rose from my chair, collecting my purse and the manila folder. My footsteps echoed faintly against the hardwood floor, carrying the weight of a decision decades overdue. Behind me, voices rose in protest. Mom's pleading, Vanessa's indignation, Dad's sharp commands. But I didn't falter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the child who bent, who yielded, who absorbed the consequences of their decisions. I was the adult who drew the line. The click of the front door closing behind me was softer than a slam, but somehow far louder in meaning. Outside, the crisp autumn air wrapped around me like armor. For the first time, I felt free, not because they approved of me, but because I no longer needed them to. What they had mistaken for selfishness was something far more dangerous to their control: self-respect. The next morning, sunlight streamed into my apartment, warm and ordinary. But my phone wouldn't stop vibrating, Missed calls from Dad, voicemails from Mom, texts from Vanessa that grew increasingly frantic. We already gave notice. Think about the children. You're being cruel. I silenced it all. My decision had been made at that table, and nothing they threw at me would change it. Still, I knew my family. They didn't retreat. They escalated. By Monday morning, my intuition proved right. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the steam curl upward when a vibration against the counter pulled my attention. A new message from Miguel, my contractor. All materials delivered. Crew on site. Demolition begins at 7 a.m. Relief spread through me like sunlight through glass. For once, I was one step ahead. But then came the rumble. An engine, heavy, unwelcome. My phone buzzed again, Dad calling. I ignored it and walked to the window. Down the gravel road to my lakeside property, a moving truck lumbered forward, its burgundy logo blaring like a declaration of war. My heart sank and steadied all at once. They had done it. Vanessa wasn't waiting for permission. She was arriving with movers, intent on forcing her way in. By the time I reached the Lakehouse, Ray and his construction crew had already established a perimeter. Bright orange cones lined the driveway, sawhorses blocked the entrance, and men in hard hats moved with calm efficiency. My sanctuary looked less like a home and more like a fortress, and that was exactly what I needed. Ray tipped his hard hat when I arrived. Morning, Morgan. Demolition permits are posted. We're ready to start. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked toward the road. I turned. There they were. Vanessa, emerging from the truck cab in oversized sunglasses, her face flushed with indignation. Mark trailed behind, hunched and weary, while movers swung open the truck's back door, lowering the ramp with a metallic clang. Phooey, what the hell is this? Vanessa shouted, pointing at the equipment, at the barricades, at me. These men won't let our movers through. You can't block us like this. I stepped forward, calm but firm, my voice carrying across the autumn air. As I explained at dinner, the house is under full renovation. It isn't habitable. The permits are here. This property is off limits. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the fury in her eyes. We've already given notice. Where are we supposed to go? I reached into my bag and handed her an envelope. This might help. 6 months of prepaid storage for your furniture. She snatched the envelope, glanced at it, then tossed it back at me like it was poison. Storage? We need somewhere to live, Gabrielle, not to stash our things. Your housing isn't my responsibility, I replied. The words tasted strange but liberating. You've known about your foundation issues for months. You had time to make arrangements. Her face twisted, searching for weakness in me, as she had always done. When she found none, she tried another tactic. Striding toward the front door, she pulled a key from her pocket and jammed it into the lock. For a second, my stomach tightened, but then came the sound I had been waiting for. A robotic voice chirped from the small speaker by the door. Unauthorized entry attempt detected. Alerting property owner and security service. Vanessa froze, twisting the key harder. Nothing. She whirled around, her face flushed red. You changed the locks? Last week, I said simply, nodding toward the discreet cameras mounted along the roofline. My phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected. Security notified. Her composure cracked. You can't do this to us. We're family. I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. Family respects boundaries. The words cut deeper than I expected. For the first time, I saw something beyond fury in her expression, fear. Because this wasn't just about a house. This was about a lifetime of entitlement suddenly ending. Behind her, Mark looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his shoulders bowed under the weight of complicity. The movers hesitated, shifting awkwardly, waiting for instruction. Ray's crew remained calm, clipboard in hand, waiting for my signal. Proceed, I told him. The sound of saws and hammers roared to life. A wall thudded as the first swing of a sledgehammer landed. My house, my sanctuary, was officially being stripped to the studs. Vanessa staggered back, her voice cracking into shrill desperation. You'll regret this, Gabrielle. Renovations before family? Really? You're heartless. But I didn't move. I watched as her performance of tears began, on cue, just as it always had at birthdays, holidays, any moment she didn't get her way. But the difference now was that I no longer believed in the script. As the movers started unloading a mahogany dresser onto my lawn without asking, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had saved the night before. Lakeside Auction House? Yes, this is Gabrielle Morgan. You can proceed with pickup. Donate all proceeds to the foster youth program. Vanessa's head snapped toward me. What auction house? The one I arranged yesterday, I said, meeting her eyes without flinching. I anticipated this. Her mouth fell open. The furniture that symbolized her claim to my home had just become someone else's hope. And in that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about rewriting the rules of my life. The crunch of gravel under car tires signaled their arrival before I saw them. I was standing inside the gutted shell of my Lakehouse, drywall dust floating in the air like a ghost of what once was, when the security chime announced 2 vehicles approaching. Through the skeletal beams, I spotted the silver sedan that had ferried me to piano lessons and family vacations years ago. My parents had come. The timing couldn't have been more cinematic. Just as the sledgehammer punched through the last wall of the master bedroom, the room Vanessa had already claimed as hers, their car rolled to a stop beside the construction equipment. Sunlight poured through the exposed frame, a flood of brightness that felt almost biblical. Mom stepped out first, clutching her handbag to her chest, her eyes wide as if she had just discovered the ruins of Pompeii. Dad followed, his shoulders squared, jaw tight, the controlled anger of a man used to closing deals with sheer force of will. What have you done? His voice carried across the yard, competing with the scream of a circular saw chewing through wood. I walked out onto the porch, wearing my hard hat and protective goggles. My boots crunched against debris. 9-month renovation, I said evenly. Everything down to the studs. They exchanged a glance, one of those silent, lifelong communications they had perfected. Together, they stepped toward the house, cautious explorers entering unfamiliar territory. Mom gasped audibly when she crossed the threshold. Gone were the gleaming hardwood floors and ornate fireplace. Instead, bare beams, ripped up subflooring, exposed wiring. "This is insanity," she whispered. "You've destroyed it." "No," I corrected. "I'm rebuilding it. My vision. My timeline." Dad's eyes roamed the space, calculating, analyzing. Even through his anger, I saw it, the businessman in him, recognizing the scale of my investment, the strategy behind my decisions. But pride and control weighed heavier than reason. "Gabrielle," he said firmly, "this is excessive. Stop this madness, and we can still make arrangements for Vanessa's family." I laughed. Not hysterically, not bitterly, just a single, sharp laugh that ricocheted off the exposed studs. "That's not happening." His face darkened, storm clouds gathering. "You've never understood family obligation. I can cut you out of the will entirely." The words hung in the air, sharp and threatening. 6 months ago, those words would have gutted me. I would have felt the familiar panic, the compulsion to appease, but not anymore. "You already did," I said calmly. Both of them froze. Mom's lips parted in shock. Dad's color drained. I set down the blueprints I was holding and met their eyes. When I refused to co-sign Mark's failed real estate deal last year, Vanessa told me everything. She said you'd already rewritten the will to protect family assets. Her words, not mine. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom's eyes filled with tears, the kind she had weaponized my whole life, flooding conversations with guilt until I drowned in it. "Gabrielle, please think of the children." But I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to Rico, the foreman, who stood nearby with his clipboard. "How's the children's reading nook coming along?" "Framing's almost done," he said, nodding toward the far corner where wooden outlines took shape. "It'll look just like your designs." My parents followed my gaze, confusion etched into their faces. "For the foster youth program," I explained. "The same one that received the $12,000 from the auction." Mom blinked, as if the concept short-circuited her. Dad's jaw tightened further. "Vanessa said you sold family heirlooms." "Furniture left abandoned on property she doesn't own," I corrected. The auction house documented everything. It was a very public process. Mom grabbed Dad's arm, her voice shrill. "Charles, she's making us look terrible. People are talking." I pulled out my phone and tapped a few screens. Public shaming only works when the truth isn't known. I turned the display toward them. Vanessa's deleted posts about being homeless glared back, alongside hundreds of comments praising the donation of furniture to youth in need. The weight of the moment pressed on all of us. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under it. Dad straightened his shoulders, slipping into negotiation mode. His voice softened, less commanding, more deliberate. "Let's discuss options. Then, perhaps we can reach a compromise." It was subtle, but unmistakable. The shift from demand to negotiation. The first sign that their fortress of control was beginning to crack. "I'll help Vanessa find housing within her budget," I said, my tone cool, unwavering. "But the renovation continues as planned." For the first time, Mom's voice softened in return, not manipulative, but almost cautious. "That would be appreciated." My phone buzzed again. Notifications. The security company confirming no more unauthorized entry attempts. the auction house emailing official receipts for tax purposes, my contractor sending progress photos of the deck. Torticano. Life was moving forward, with or without their approval. And as Dad studied the blueprints laid out across a makeshift table, I caught it, that flicker in his eyes. Recognition, respect, reluctant admiration for something he could no longer control. For the first time in years, the power had shifted. Not through anger, not through threats, but through boundaries. 3 months later, I found myself back at the same dining table where it had all begun. Burgundy napkins, crystal glasses scattering light like broken promises, the faint aroma of Mom's pot roast. Déjà vu, except this time I wasn't the same woman who had sat here, blindsided and cornered. I knew what this was. Another staged intervention. And sure enough, the extra place settings confirmed it. Your mother made her special roast, Dad said, his knife carving through the meat with forced casualness, like he was negotiating over dinner instead of facing his daughter's boundaries. It smells wonderful, I replied, smoothing my napkin across my lap, but my eyes stayed sharp. Are we expecting company? Mom and Dad exchanged a glance, that familiar silent signal that had haunted my childhood. Reinforcements were coming. The doorbell chimed. Dad's shoulders relaxed, his relief obvious. I'll get it, Mom said, slipping out of the room. Moments later, she returned with Pastor Williams, our family's longtime spiritual advisor. Gabrielle, wonderful to see you. He sat down beside me, his presence meant to tilt the balance, to soften me with authority cloaked in faith. My parents had always been masters at this, using the illusion of impartial juries to pressure me. Your mother tells me you've been busy with renovations, Pastor Williams said warmly. Transformative ones, I answered, meeting his gaze. My tone was steady. I knew exactly why he was here. Dinner proceeded like theater. Dad dropped hints about family harmony. Mom sighed about the children missing their aunt. Pastor Williams spoke about unity and forgiveness. I listened in silence, my grip tightening slightly around my fork. And then Dad made his move. The Hendersons helped their daughter's family last year, opened their home for 8 months during renovations. Brought them closer. The comparison game. Subtle reminders of what good families do, each anecdote layered like bricks meant to box me in. But I had prepared for this moment. I set my fork down and reached for my handbag. From it, I pulled out my tablet, unlocking the screen with a deliberate tap. Since we're discussing renovations, I said, let me show you something. The first image filled the screen. Scaffolding hugging my lake house, workers in hard hats buzzing like bees. I swiped gutted interiors, stripped walls, beams exposed. Then, transformation. Vaulted ceilings, reclaimed oak floors, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the lake like a painting. Pastor Williams leaned closer, genuinely intrigued. My goodness, what a transformation. This was day 1, I explained. This was last week. I flipped to the master suite, the one Vanessa had tried to claim. Now it was unrecognizable. Sleek lines, a private balcony, sunlight pouring in like blessing. Mom's fork halted midair. It's completely different. That was the point, I said softly. Then I swiped to another folder. Old photos, storm damage, water flooding the first floor, mold creeping up walls. Receipts for $28,000 in emergency repairs. Screenshots of unanswered texts I had sent years ago. Can someone help? Please call me. Replies that never came because they were too busy on their Caribbean cruise. The silence in the dining room was heavier than stone. Respecting boundaries isn't cruelty, I said, my voice cutting through it. It's adulthood. For the first time, Dad's shoulders sagged, the hard edges of his posture softening. He looked less like the patriarch, more like a man recognizing he'd been outmaneuvered. Mom's eyes shimmered with something unfamiliar, shame, maybe even regret. I should have helped with those repairs, she whispered. No qualifiers, no excuses. The closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. The door opened again. Vanessa swept in, cheeks flushed, expecting a united front behind her. Instead, she found silence. Mom and Dad subdued. Pastor Williams thoughtful. My tablet glowing with evidence instead of emotion. What's going on? She demanded, looking from face to face. We were discussing the Lakehouse situation, Mom said carefully. I stood, sliding a card across the table. The housewarming is scheduled for March 12th. You're welcome to attend as guests, with advance notice. Vanessa froze, her confidence crumbling in the unfamiliar silence. I gathered my things and walked toward the door. Behind me, no one stopped me this time. The balance had shifted. Driving away, I felt it for the first time, peace not tied to surrender, but to standing firm. Twilight settled over the lake as I pictured my house glowing with construction lights, workers still hammering, rebuilding. My sanctuary. My rules. 6 months later, I woke to sunlight dancing across my ceiling, golden reflections rippling off the lake through the floor-to-ceiling windows I had once only dreamed of. The house was finished. My house. The air was quiet, except for birdsong and the rhythmic lap of water against the dock. No ringing phones. No shouting children. No one telling me I was selfish for protecting what I had built. Just silence, full and clean. I cradled a mug of coffee between my palms, inhaling the scent of roasted beans and cedar beams, marveling at how peace has its own texture when it's earned. I padded into the kitchen, copper accents gleaming under morning light, reclaimed wood countertops warm against my fingertips. Last weekend, I'd hosted friends here, real friends, serving wine in glasses I chose, not ones passed down with strings attached. Laughter had echoed through these walls, not demands. The gym now occupied what Vanessa once declared her master suite. Every time I stepped onto the treadmill, I smiled at the irony. Self-care where entitlement once tried to plant its flag. A text buzzed on my phone. Rachel, my contractor-turned-friend, wrote, "Still can't believe we pulled this off. Best project ever." I smiled, remembering how she had raised her eyebrows when I first outlined my vision. "You want to gut a perfectly good house?" "Yes, because sometimes you have to strip things down to the studs to make them truly yours." The doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw my parents standing awkwardly on the porch. Dad shifting his weight, Mom clutching a small jade plant like an offering. Their first visit since construction ended. I pressed the intercom. "Come in," I said, unlocking the door remotely. They stepped inside cautiously, their eyes widening at the transformation. Dad's gaze lingered on the vaulted ceilings, the reclaimed beams. "Remarkable," he murmured, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Mom placed the jade plant on the side table, her eyes traveling over the photographs on the wall, hiking trips, design projects, sunset swims. Not a single family portrait among them. "This is who I've become," I said simply. Dad nodded, his business mind unable to hide its reluctant admiration. "You've created something remarkable here." It wasn't surrender. It wasn't reconciliation. It was recognition. And for me, that was enough. Later that evening, the house filled with life again, friends dropping by, Rachel bringing champagne, even the auction house director stopping in with photos of the foster youth center, now furnished with Vanessa's abandoned heirlooms. "They cried when they saw it," he said. First time they ever had matching furniture. My phone buzzed once more. A message from Vanessa. "I'm sorry about the furniture. Can we talk?" I typed my reply carefully. "Dinner next month. Bring dessert. No discussion about moving in. Boundaries, clear and firm. Protection, not punishment." When the guests left and twilight stretched across the lake, Dad paused at the door. He met my eyes, his voice steady. "Respecting boundaries isn't cruelty," he said slowly, almost reverently. "It's adulthood." Hearing my own words reflected back felt like the final renovation, the invisible one, inside me. I walked down to the dock alone. The lake shimmered under the fading sun, colors rippling from gold to purple. My reflection on the water was solid now, no longer distorted by guilt or obligation. For years, I had believed peace meant yielding. But tonight, standing on the dock of a house rebuilt by my own vision, I understood the truth. Peace doesn't come from surrender. It comes from standing firm in who you are and demanding the respect you deserve. And in that sanctuary, my sanctuary, I had finally found both. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched you, I wish you health, peace, and happiness in your own family. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please don't forget to subscribe and stay connected.